Good afternoon. Erin, sorry. My name is Erin Perez. I am a professor in the music education department as well as an associate conductor at the Blair School of Music. And I'm also a mother of a 4-month-old.
My name is Anna Thomas, and I am the Director of Parent and Family Programs here in Vanderbilt's Development and Alumni Relations Department.
And I'm Quinton Walker. I direct and am the Dean of Global Studies at Holy Innocents Episcopal School in Atlanta, Georgia. And we have had the opportunity to work with Brevard College. We've presented to our client, to the leadership team, I think for about 25 to 30 constituents on campus a couple of weeks ago. And really the topic of our presentation is the idea of advancement in the wake of an institutional transition. As its mission, just to underscore before we start, Brevard College is committed to an experiential liberal arts education that encourages personal growth and inspires artistic, intellectual, and social action. An agenda for us today, we'll first have a brief overview and our approach to our project. Anna will walk us through this idea of alumni and how alumni connect and engage and subsequently gift into college. Erin will look at friends and the same kind of relationship. How do we engage friends and how does that turn into a donation? And I'll look at benchmarking in terms of other institutions who have gone through a transition. And the transition here in question is, in 1995, Brevard moved from a 2-year college to a 4-year college. And that transition creates a bifurcated set of alumni. And we're going to explore that division more here in a bit. I want to start with the context to give you a kind of a big picture of where we are. You see here on the left, I want to talk about small liberal arts colleges. First, they are relevant today, and we assert that they'll continue to be relevant. But we need to be very mindful of things they're going through. This mission versus market dynamic that they have to really work through, grapple with, is really important. Underscoring all that, this idea of tuition dependence. They're small, and they're small for a reason. They're intimate, but they really depend on student enrollment to make sure they have all they need financially. Brevard College is a really great example of that. As I said, in 1995, they went from 2 to 4 years, and that's really important for this story. They aspired at that time to be 1,000 students. That's really the magic number they've identified across all institutions. Right now, they're at 650. So let's create these financial challenges that Brevard is really trying to work through. And that's where we've adopted our approach. Essentially, we're creating 3 profiles. A profile of alumni, a profile of friends, and a profile of similar institutions who have gone through a transition. And that's really what the advancement piece is at Brevard.
And that brings us to our 3 project questions. As Quinton has mentioned, some of the most prevalent concerns of our client was the low alumni levels of giving, as well as their perceived identity crisis, who they are as an institution with this new mission, and who they are according to this transition. And then they also had a concern when it comes to how they compare to similar institutions. So that leads us to these 3 questions. The first being, what personal characteristics contribute to levels of alumni giving? Second, what is the perception of Brevard College among alumni and friends of the institution? And it's important to note that friends are those who have no affiliation with Brevard except for that they live in the same Transylvania County, and they tend to contribute as well. And then thirdly, how does Brevard College compare to benchmarks of similar liberal arts institutions that have successfully transitioned from a 2-year to a 4-year college? Which brings us to our model of inquiry. So what we did is that we chose to take these 3 problems or symptoms and decided to actually tackle these through a mixed method approach. Through the quantitative portion, we are going to answer these 2 questions through a quantitative alumni survey, and then also through a qualitative friend interview with one-on-one standard interviews. And then this last portion is going to be covered through a qualitative peer group benchmarking study, and these will all compile to be our institutional recommendations. And so now we're going to pass the torch to Anna, where she will talk about the first project question.
Great. So I'm going to start by talking a little bit about the personal characteristics that contribute to low levels of alumni giving. This is our first project question. So to answer this question, we made 5 hypotheses, and I'm going to briefly go through these 5 hypotheses and the methods that we use to analyze our data. So first, we hypothesize that the more students are involved during their time at Brevard, the more likely they are to be a donor. Second, we assume that the more fond memories that one reports from their time as a student, the more likely they are to be a donor. Third, the more positive their undergraduate experience. So think here, satisfaction. The more satisfaction one has with their experience, the greater likelihood of giving. Fourth, to tackle this question about the 2 versus the 4-year alumni, we are hypothesizing that they are significantly different, that these 2 groups look very different. And to look at those 4 hypotheses, we do a regression model. These 3 first items we created scales for, and they're all considered part of the student experience. I'll talk about the scales in just a moment. And then for this last 5th hypothesis, we hypothesized that the more engaged and connected you are as an alumni, so once you've graduated, the more likely you are to give. So for this, we also did another regression model that looks specifically at some alumni engagement measures. So here, student measures, here, alumni measures. So what was our methodology? We distributed an electronic survey via email to all the Brevard College alumni. So to develop this survey, we used existing surveys in the field and combined questions with 3 topics. They were questions about student experience, questions about giving behaviors, and questions about alumni engagement. We also obviously asked a number of demographic questions that we were able to use in our analysis as well. To administer the survey, we were able to use all of the alumni that we had accurate emails for in the Brevard database. There's around 3,000 alumni. This is only a third of the total alumni at Brevard College. There are about 9,000 alumni at Brevard College on record, but we only have emails for a third of those. So that is our population. The response that we got to that survey, we had 549 responses. 470 of those that were complete, and so we had an 18% response rate, which we were pleased with. That was above and beyond what Brevard had in past communications or surveys they had done with alumni. So now, as I mentioned earlier, the 3 scales that we use in our first 3 hypotheses, we have a campus involvement scale, fondness for Brevard scale, and a positive undergraduate experience scale. Again, here we're thinking about satisfaction. So those 3 scales, we combined questions on the survey. So for the first one, we asked people to let us know if they were involved in an organization, if they led an organization, and we summed those 4 items. You see the mean at the bottom. Fondness for Brevard, we had 16 items, and we had them select which of the 16 were their fondest memories. So the average response there was about 5 out of 16. Again, we summed this total to create our scale. On the 3rd scale, we asked 4 items that were all on a 1 to 5 Likert scale. So we averaged those items together, and again, you can see the mean here at the bottom.
Wouldn't the mean be, though, the average of the items within that scale?
That's correct.
So
right.
how come that's a 0.5? That sounds like so the average, if it's on a 1 to 5 scale, that would be the average. Is that what it is for fondness for Brevard?
So that's a 5. So this is a sum scale. So, sorry,
okay,
go
so
back.
that's a different kind of scale.
Right, so these 2 are summed and this one's on an average.
Okay,
so on
gotcha.
these 2, the average was people selected 5 out of these 16 memories
Okay,
as their
gotcha.
fondest memories. Yes,
Okay.
thank you. Oh, I don't know what happened there.
Sorry, I did that by accident.
I'm not sure what happened to our slide here.
It's interesting here too.
So you're
Okay,
doing
well, we're
things
just going to go with it.
You're doing things with mirrors? Is that what you're
Yeah. So this is the first technical glitch of the day. But I can pretty much remember what was on the slide, so I'll talk you through it. So this is our first regression model. So to test those first 4 hypotheses, we did a regression model. In that regression model, we controlled for personal characteristics, and we basically, our dependent variable was giving behaviors, and the independent variables were the scales plus the number of personal characteristics that we controlled for. We used a p-value of 0.05, and our model fit for this particular model was 0.1443. So this suggested that the model accounts for 14% of the variance in alumni giving. Okay. So now I'm going to talk through these hypotheses and the results on each of the hypotheses. So first, the hypothesis, just to remind you, we assumed that the more involved a student was, the more likely they were to be a donor. And the beta for this particular item you see here, so they're 13% more likely to be a donor if they're involved in activities. Well, what's the practical significance of this to Brevard College? Well, 83% of the respondents were involved in 0 to 2 activities. So if they increased, those 83% of people, if they increased their activities by 1 to 2 activities during their time at Brevard, they could be almost 30% more likely to be a donor by being more involved as a student. So this has practical significance for Brevard.
Now that B weight, that's an unstandardized regression?
That's standardized beta.
Okay.
A second hypothesis was that, I don't know what's happening here either,
Or smoke and mirrors.
was that the more fond memories that you had of your time at Brevard College, the more likely you were to be a donor. This was not supported. We had no support for this in our findings. Okay. Third, we assume that the more satisfied you are with your experience at Brevard, the more likely you are to be a donor. So again here, you can see the beta value when we looked directly at the satisfaction and the giving, the relationship between those two. Practical significance, 81% of respondents on this 5-point Likert scale of satisfaction rate fell between a 2 and a 4. So if they increased by 1 point on this scale, then they're going to be 14% more likely to be a donor.
Anna, did you look at all, is it the magnitude of the donation or just whether or not they gave?
Whether or not they gave. Okay.
That's why you can put it in the percentage terms.
So fourth, we made the assumption that there would be significant differences between the 2-year alumni and the 4-year alumni. So the people who got associate's degrees versus the people who got bachelor's degrees from Brevard College. We found this was supported by our findings, and in fact, if you held a bachelor's degree, you were 14% more likely to be a donor than those who have held associate's degrees. This makes a lot of sense. You have more time at Brevard to have more fond memories. You have more time to be satisfied with your experience. You know, it makes sense. Okay. For the second model, we're shifting now. Those were the student experiences. Now we're going to look at alumni experiences. So the things that we measured here are listed at the bottom. We asked alumni, here's Brevard's mission. Do you believe they embody their mission? We asked them, do you feel a sense of personal responsibility to maintain the quality of a Brevard education? And then we asked them, what is your current level of connectedness to Brevard College? So these 3 items we put into a second regression model controlled for personal characteristics. Again, you see here that we used a 0.05 p-value, and the model fit was 0.235, so 23% of the variance in giving is accounted for by these alumni engagement measures. So this is kind of an interesting slide. So as we drill down a little bit on these findings, in this model, these 3 measures that I just talked through, we had this really interesting finding here. It was puzzling to us that the more that they agreed that Brevard embodied their mission, the less likely they were to give. But then if they felt a sense of personal responsibility, here they're 30% more likely to give, more connected, 16% more likely to give. So we think what's probably happening here, when you look at just mission embodiment and giving by itself, you have a positive relationship. So we think that it's something to do with putting these in a model together, and it kind of washes out the effect of mission embodiment. And then as we're going to talk about more, there's a little bit of a murky understanding of the mission at Brevard. I mentioned we'll hit on that in more detail.
Well, one quick question here, and I know we're only supposed to ask clarifying questions, but is there given the fact that alumni experiences were a much stronger predictor of alumni giving, yes gave or did not give, did you look for a relationship between alumni, what they're doing as alumni compared to what their own experience was as a student, like fondness for Brevard, involvement in the undergraduate experience?
We did not correlate that directly. No, that would be an interesting next step to take. But a lot of the literature says that the more engaged you are as a student, the more involved you are as an alum, the more likely you are to give. So this makes a lot of sense. So just to go back to our original question, which what makes a donor? What are the personal characteristics that contribute to donating to Brevard? So we're looking at someone who is involved, someone who has great satisfaction with their experience, someone who feels connected as an alumni, and someone who feels a sense of personal responsibility. That's a picture of an alumni donor. So we're going to shift now and look at a friend donor. What is the perception of Brevard among friends, and what do the friend donors look like? Erin's going to take us off for it.
Thank you. So one of the interesting nuances about Brevard College is that the friends tend to give more than the alumni. Brevard stated that this is a really peculiar characteristic about them, and they wanted us to explore it further. So what we ended up doing was conducting one-on-one interviews with a total of 18 friends, and we framed our questions that were specific to Brevard's interests. And they fell under these categories of engagement, image perception, as well as giving. And we chose those categories to mirror some of the categories that Anna spoke about earlier in the survey. From the responses, we extrapolated these emergent themes, and we have 7 of them. First being mountains and valleys, which are questions regarding strengths and weaknesses of Brevard. Face of a tornado, and a tornado is their mascot, and those are student characteristics. Making a shift, those are questions regarding the effects of the transition from a 2-year to a 4-year institution. Positive new leadership were responses about the administration. We go hand in hand our interactions with the community. Basically, we asked friends what they thought were strong ways that Brevard connected with the community. And then we also pulled why I give, and these were specifically what motivates these people to give. And then lastly, experiential education, which correlates with, of course, their mission here at the bottom. And this was their perception of what the Brevard mission is as of today. We analyzed these themes through an interview matrix, as you can see here, and we plugged in just any key points or any illustrative quotes that we could find from all of these responses. And I wanted to just identify the second to last category here. This theme, why I give, is where we really connected our conceptual framework for this project question. The conceptual framework that we used is called the 7 Faces of Philanthropy, and I'll go further into that a little bit later. And the 7 Faces of Philanthropy provides you with 7 personality characteristics of philanthropic donors. So basically, what are these people like, and what motivates them to give? So we use this conceptual framework to not only frame recommendations, but sort of to depict some of the behaviors of the Brevard friends. So now I'm just going to only talk about just a few of the salient themes that we actually went through earlier. And one of them that was most prevalent are the strengths. Friends had a lot of opinions about the strengths of Brevard. They were saying that the music program, the outdoorsy environment, the faculty that were very selfless and they were very committed, and the size were some of the very strong strengths about Brevard College. I think that the size was something that was particularly important because Brevard was stating that they felt the pressure from the market to increase enrollment, to make themselves larger, obviously because they have less than 1,000 students. However, the people in the local community are saying that this is one of their strengths, and they're saying that they really recommend that Brevard should capitalize on this and maintain their small, intimate class settings. One friend says, the small setting allows it to be a big family. Students feel involved and get personal attention. And another friend even said that they believe that a student cannot be anonymous even if they tried to. Now, as Anna mentioned earlier, the mission seems to be a little bit unclear. And I want to make a point that this is responses from the friends in a loving way, more so that they are loving critics. So it seems as if that this mission that Brevard is trying to embody about experiential education is more internally understood, but when it comes to the external local community, they're not quite getting it. That doesn't necessarily mean that the local community thinks negatively of Brevard. It just means that they have a different perception of what Brevard is. So one friend says, that's something I've struggled with. They keep popping out the word experiential, but people have a different spin on it. There isn't a clear mission, and that's a real problem for me. So this is something that seems to be one of the most prevalent concerns when it comes to the local community about who Brevard really is according to what they're saying that they are. And then another key theme was the fact that the transition seems to correlate with some of the concerns that the Brevard faculty as well as staff seem to have. The friends really understand that the market really pushed Brevard into this path of transitioning from a 2-year to a 4-year institution. They felt pressured, they felt like they didn't have a choice, and as a result, they realized that the alumni base is more restricted. They are noticing that the 2-year alumni, the one who have actually graduated prior to 1995, those seem to have competing loyalties, where they're committed to giving not only to Brevard, but they're also committed to giving to an institution that they probably graduated with their Bachelor of Arts degree. And then, secondly, they also realize simply because they transitioned so late in the game, then there's not a large pool of 4-year alumni. And this tends to be a problem, and the local community understands that. And then this is going to lead us into our conceptual framework. We ask ourselves, what are we going to do with all these responses? So how are we going to use this information to help Brevard? And that leads us to the 7 faces of philanthropy. These are some of the characteristics, if you notice some of these faces. Some of these faces are a little bit familiar, maybe, maybe not. But it seems that out of all the 7 personalities, that these 4 seem to be the most prevalent of the people the sample that we interviewed. You have the communitarian, you have the investor, you have a repayer, and you have a socialite. And what you're going to see in the following, what you'll see in the following slides are going to be some really illustrative quotes that sort of represent what a communitarian and all these personalities are. But I'm going to give you some key characteristics about these people to understand what really motivates them to give. So a large majority of the friends are communitarians. We would say would fall under this category. Giving to them makes good sense. They obviously see that Brevard is a bulwark of the town, and if it thrives, the town thrives. It really motivates them to see that this institution is not only doing well, but of course the people who are involved in it. So these people really are, I think this is a more of a target group for Brevard College, because a lot of them really see that there is this nice relationship between Brevard and everybody who's involved in, of course, the town. And then you see a large number of them are investors. These people give simply because it makes good business sense. They want to make sure that their dollars actually are making an impact. And these people are really driven based off of results. So if they see that there are good quality students, if they see that there may even be an increase of students, and if they also see that the facilities and the campus is thriving, that really inspires them to give. And then these last 2, the repayer, these are your alumni. The alumni are going to give simply because they're giving in return. And this is important, of course, because Brevard needs to make sure that they're giving a really a strong experience for these students. Because if they have this really impactful moment, then that's going to inspire them to give later on when they build their wealth. And then lastly, you also have a group of the friends who are socialites, and they give simply because it's fun. They like to actually see Brevard thrive. They like to hang out at Brevard. They love the music program, and this is something that really inspires them to give.
Sold.
Okay. So what we did here was just illustrated just how the local community perceives Brevard to get a better understanding over who they are to the local community and what really motivates these people to give. And now what we're going to do is sort of broaden our scope so we can understand how Brevard compares to similar institutions.
So as Erin said, we have a profile now of alumni, we have a profile of friends. Let's look externally to other institutions who have gone through a transition like Brevard. And really kind of 2 questions guide our approach here. The first, who do we compare to? What institutions have gone through this transition before? And the second question being, once we know that group, what indicators do we need to really look at? What are the important pieces for Brevard to consider as it analyzes how well it's done with this transition to date? And this really is a response to not having any norms, not having really clarity about what exists out there in this field, and really a lack of research around this very particular topic of institutional advancement with the group of separate or divided alumni and friends. So first, who are we looking at? They needed to be in each of the 3 criteria that we've outlaid here. First, small liberal arts colleges. Secondly, a transition from 2 to 4 years. And thirdly, in order to have a really nice institutional feel drawn for Brevard, we want schools with a similar flair and feel. So schools who in the Appalachian College Association were included. Those criteria yielded us 11 institutions to look at, 7 were included in our benchmarking study. From this, once we've drawn this group to look at, what did we ask? What did we want to know? Again, building upon our alumni and friend survey and interview protocols, we've drawn very similar questions for us to really explore. Who are alumni? How do you reach out to them? What do you want to engage them with? How do you use friends of the local community to really involve yourself in the college? And then, again, a lack of research. What do you need to know from other schools who are like you working through this particular issue? So again, from that from these different groups, we have 4 sets of identified best practices that we've looked at. Organizational structures and mindsets, communications, community relations, and how we engage our alumni. And that's really the framework that we've set up for our analysis here. On each of these slides, you'll see in the blue box kind of best practices or distinctive practices identified at these colleges. And then we give an example, which I'll talk through at each of these institutions, that really highlights the kind of practices we want to recommend for Brevard. The first one around organizational structures. At Ferrum College, from the vice president, I communicate that to my office that it's TMIA. And if we don't work together, we're spending a lot more energy than we need to. So this kind of organizational paradigm is really critical for Brevard as they move forward. Here, thinking about communication practices. Lees McRae does a really nice job in engaging its alumni in ways beyond stewardship and alumni giving or alumni donation. They bring alumni back to the campus and career center in 2 ways. One, they encourage them to involve themselves in the service school by being interview practitioners, by helping them network with our current Lees McRae students. They also avail the services to the alumni. Say, please come use us. If you need resume critique, you need practice interviewing, come back and engage yourself here in this way. And that kind of interaction can generate interest in giving to the school. Thirdly, with alumni engagement best practices. Virginia Intermont, as a school that's going through some transition now itself, and it's joining 2 other schools, has really been thoughtful about mining its data. It knows where alumni are. It knows where they're settling. By and large, our alumni move to Richmond and Roanoke and surrounding areas. So they strategically mine their data and target those areas to have strategic alumni events in. And this is something Brevard would be well served to consider moving forward. Thinking about methodology as far as from who we've talked to, what do we need to know? 3 real indicators we want to look at for a dashboard, if you will. In terms of enrollment, how big is the student population? Financially, where are we? How stable are we moving forward? This is really one of our key questions. And then institutional advancement, where are we short and long term in terms of fundraising and development progress? And I'll talk through these quickly. From an enrollment standpoint, Brevard, you'll see here, is faring okay as compared to the other schools in the peer group. In 2010, at the 30th percentile, it does well in the 95th percentile in 2011, but then falls back to the 35th percentile in 2012. So it's got some ways to go as far as how to retain the students. And I think you'll see why that has to do with student satisfaction. Financially, Brevard is really struggling at this point. And we see that compared to the other peer group. Again, across all 30 years, near the bottom of the peer group with this financial aid index that we've chosen to use for financial stability moving forward. And lastly, with advancement, again, a more stable measure of kind of long-term growth. Brevard is at the median in every year. So it's doing okay. It has room to improve for sure. That's really the story we want to tell here. But when we hold up this kind of indicator or dashboard set, a question really emerges for us. Is Brevard just late to the game? Here the 11 institutions are rated by the year of transition from 2 to 4 year. Brevard's in its infancy. It has a ways to go still yet. So that's why this benchmarking piece is so very important. We've taken all this and developed a set of recommendations, which Anna will talk through for us now.
So you actually have a handout that we've passed out at the beginning of the presentation that outline the recommendations that we're making to Brevard. I'm going to give a quick overview, and then we might just hit on 1 or 2 key ideas that we're putting forward. So first, we're recommending that Brevard really look at how solicitations are made to donors. So maybe segmenting the donor population to do specific solicitations to certain types of donors. Second, exploring institutional advancement infrastructure. So this is sort of the facilities, the staffing, all of these pieces. Systemic consideration of advancement. So this idea is considering advancement across the institution from enrollment, graduation, onto alumni status. Fourth, bridge the gap between students and alumni. So how can we really ease this transition? How can we really build donors while they're students so they transition to alumni dollars coming back into the college? And then finally, looking at organizing key events to connect donors back to Brevard College at certain times throughout the year. All of these recommendations we pulled together from the conceptual framework, our extant literature, and then also from this benchmarking study that we did looking at some of these other schools' best practices. So just really quickly to hit a couple of things, and then we'll open for questions. In terms of this, how solicitations are made to donors, one thing that we recommend is that maybe Brevard look at these personality types of donors that Erin went through, for example, the communitarian. Maybe since that's a huge bulk of the Brevard donors, you segment a solicitation targeted towards that style of personality, towards that reason for giving back. Next, institutional advancement infrastructure. When we look at the other schools in the Appalachian College Consortium, the average staffing in the advancement offices is about 8 people. The highest had 14. Brevard has 4.5 people. So they're doing a lot with less.
Again, thinking about this idea of how do we systematically consider advancement, the idea of a dashboard and making sure that we consider advancement across the whole institution. This is not just a fundraising problem. This is not just about donors, generating donors. It's about institutional health and stability moving forward. That's why we laid out the 3 particular pieces of the dashboard: enrollment, financial, and institutional advancement. We want to make sure that Brevard fully understands this is a whole institutional challenge moving forward rather than an isolated piece of the puzzle.
And then the last 2 recommendations, we suggest that Brevard would really make a connection between the alumni and the students from the very beginning. An opportunity for them to do is to have the students actually connect with the community while they're freshmen, so that they can see that there's just a bigger world and that they're making an impact. Another idea is for them to have a giving society or an annual gift where the students will be able to contribute annually, and then they will be able to make a better Brevard for the upcoming students. And then lastly, we suggest that they would have bookend events where they're going to have an event at the very beginning. This is an opportunity for them to really gather all of their philanthropic donors, talk about the mission. This would be a great opportunity to clarify who they are, what they stand for, and then really talk about some of the goals that they want to accomplish throughout the year. At the very end of the year, we suggest that that's an opportunity to actually address some of the things that they did accomplish and, of course, recruit more donors over the school year. So we provide all of these recommendations, and we really believe that this is going to help better Brevard, make them better situated, make them better prepared, especially with all the market demands, and they can be a lot more confident for who they are as a liberal arts college. So that concludes our presentation, and we will open up for questions. Yes.
Couple things. One's sort of a teaching moment for me. You teach me. In K-12, the single best predictor of whether people will support a bond levy for a school district is actually having been in a school campus. Do we have comparable information for givers?
So you're asking if givers are on the campus, are they more inclined?
If they have come to visit the campus in X period of time, they're more likely to give. Do you know that?
We actually didn't test for that. I've noticed that with a lot of the friends, there tended to be some type of connection where they're either on the board of trustees, they go to some of the school games, or they've had some personal contact with a Brevard faculty member, and that might have happened on campus. But that would be an interesting thing to explore.
It would, because if it turns out to be the same in higher ed as in K-12, part of the agenda would get people back.
Right, and that is with alumni, that for sure is true. So when alumni come back for reunions, they make bigger gifts. So we do definitely see that in the alumni population.
And then I have a second one, if I might just say it here. You talked about, I was curious, you talked about friends and alumni, but you didn't talk about employees. And I'm thinking about, again, not knowing your business very well, the geographical spread of the graduates, I would think would be much narrower than where we go to live and work. So I think they would be closer. And I wonder if you have the potential to disaggregate, either get employees or at least ask the question, what % of the friends were also employees?
We do have that data, and the percentage of staff and faculty giving is minuscule, almost none. And the reason is we heard we did a few sort of background informational interviews with some faculty and administrators, and we got a little bit of feedback that there hadn't been raises in a while. They were getting paid below what they should. I mean, because of the financial constraints at the school, so they're not thinking about giving back. Exactly. But,
They're just working.
yeah,
That's right.
exactly.
Contributed
But yeah, we
services.
do have that broken out from Brevard. We can see, where the gifts came from foundations, where they came from alumni, staff, faculty, parents, all of that.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Right?
I think this is really interesting. I think this school, I'm familiar with it, and its peer institutions. They're just really interesting to look at. But I do have one concern, and I may have missed it. So again, this may be a teaching moment for me. Based on the literature I know about giving, it sort of falls into two categories in terms of most significant variables. One is this peer effect, right? Is this, I feel connected to my peers, I feel connected to the school, I feel connected to this. But the other one is really pretty ROI, return on investment, right? Human capital. Did I miss the human capital piece, or are you making any recommendations about whether or not these students actually feel as though this was a good value for their money? I'm talking about this whole grouping of literature on intellectual capabilities and saleable skills when they leave.
Are they getting a return on their investment?
Yeah, are they getting a return on investment? And did I miss this in this? Because as I see it, that's about 50% of the literature on giving.
One good example to this, to your statement, Brian, is one of the friends actually is the mayor of the Transylvania County, and he actually experienced Brevard when he was in high school through a dual enrollment program.
Yeah.
So that was one of the, unfortunately he was only one, I think, of 3 of the repayers, the ones that were actually alumni who went through the school. So we didn't get a lot of those responses, but we do see that effect where they had a really strong experience, and especially if it helped them out intellectually, possibly help them with social mobility, and they could get a better job, better status, then they are more inclined to give. So that's one way that we
Or
talk
even
about.
maybe access to a four-year institution that they wouldn't have had access to.
Well, I think part of this is that pre-1995, Brevard was a great 2-year college, and they sent their graduates to places like North Carolina, to Duke, to Davidson. Those are the schools that they described, and that's not the case anymore. This school is, I won't say open access, but it's a school certainly where the admission thresholds are a bit lower, and they have real challenges with retention. They're really working through now. So as far as the ROI piece, I know that the school is aware of it, and they're curious about it. Kind of concurrent to us, they have another set of consultants in right now looking at retention pieces. So the ROI right now at Brevard is a question mark for the advanced office.
Well, I wonder. I'm sorry, Joe. I think it's a huge opportunity to expand some of this as well, right? To say, look, don't just take this in isolation. Whatever those consultants find, you actually may want to think about this as a whole another set of levers.
Well, one thing along the lines of what Brian's question is, I wonder this return on investment, is that are people giving now to keep the institution afloat as opposed to raising the reputation of the school, which in turn
Right.
increases the value of their
They have
degree?
very low endowment, and there's very few gifts to the endowment. So you're seeing the friends really are supporting, because they're living in the community, and they want the school to thrive because they're living there. Whereas the alumni, that's why we see more friends giving right now than alumni. The alumni, because they have so few that have hit this, 95 was the first year that they transitioned to a 4-year school, so they don't have a lot of, the age is correlated with giving, so they haven't aged yet into the ability to give big gifts back to the college.
Plus, the 2-year graduates may have a loyalty to the school that
Exactly.
they transfer
Exactly.
to, and not to Brevard also.
Exactly.
Can you share a little bit of how your presentation went, and if they seemed to gravitate towards any of your recommendations, or how that went?
Sure. I think the presentation was well received. I think they are, had it been 5 years ago, they would not have been. I think right now the school, under the new leadership of David Joyce, has really taken steps forward to be really realistic about where they are. They understand financially they're not very stable, but more so than 3 years ago. They understand they have real challenges with retention from students from year 1 to year 4 to actually graduate. 6-year graduation rates in the 30% or so, give or take. And they understand they have to look externally to really see what other schools are doing to grapple with this kind of separated or bifurcated alumni group. especially when it's not mature yet. They know the age is 55 when donors really start to give significant gifts, the transformational gifts. So they're really cognizant of where they are. And so with that said, I think they understand our recommendations and are looking forward to ways to use them. So they're thoughtful and certainly receptive.
What kind of questions do they ask you?
Well, we strangely got a lot of questions from some of the friends who participated were here, and so it turned out to be a little bit of a forum. They were stewarding the friends by letting them come, and so it was kind of a forum for them to air some of their opinions about things. But the questions they asked us were some clarification questions. We talked for an hour with them. It was much longer, and some questions about sort of the recommendations that we made, like what those might actually look like in practice. You know, some of that.
One oversight that they pointed out for us was around athletics, given the role of athletics in their enrollment strategy right now. And that's something that we intentionally shied away from. But it's a piece for them that they're really kind of focusing on to make sure they have enough students. I think that's 60% of their undergraduates are athletes. And they want to grow without leveraging that anymore. Because that has a certain feel on campus that they're not, some of the friends certainly were not happy with.
I was wondering if you look at schools that might have strong young alumni giving strategies, you know what I mean? Like, so,
Yeah.
especially small liberal arts colleges, the Amherst, the Williams, the Wesleyan, you know what I mean? Like, that probably have like,
Or even center, even one's closer by.
you know, because I know, like, as a steward and or whatever, alumni agent, whatever, like, we have the competitions in the young alumni classes,
Yeah.
and who can raise the most money, what percentages of class, what percentage of which class has the highest percentage of participation.
Right.
And looking at schools that have actual, like, strong young alumni, think about how in this transition period,
Right.
they can build, you know, the energy that's necessary so that when people do cross over to that threshold, that they're still engaged and active.
We looked at Young Harris, for example, which is the group we talked to, and they do a great thing with seniors that it's, every senior at the end of the year gets a piggy bank to use, and that's a competition for them to give all year long to deposit money in this piggy bank. And that goes straight to their endowment at the end of the year. So Young Harris transitioned in 2008 and increased the endowment by $40 million. And not saying came from that student piece, but they really know how to develop young donors from senior year. And they understand it actually starts, the minute you set foot on campus as a freshman, that's when you're starting to build donors. And they get that. And Brevard does not really understand that at present. And so that's one of the reasons we recommended think about how you create these bookend events, and really donors are your current students, and getting that mindset so you can start building them and developing that value from day one.
But I think your comment about these other schools that do it really well, I mean, I think we could definitely draw things from an Amherst and some of those, but Amherst has a lot different resources than some of these schools in the Appalachian Consortium do. So we really tried to keep our focus to this kind of regional area, just because these were maybe things that were more attainable than maybe looking at an Amherst or.
I was looking about strategies, more so the
Yeah.
idea of like competitions, or what are they doing to build people, incentivizing or getting that going so that
Yeah.
people feel excited about going.
I think one example that we actually talk about briefly in the report is Reed College, where they had a match program where it was dollar for dollar, where if a student contributed $5 and the president would match $5, and that made them a little bit more motivated to give, and they didn't feel the pressures of having to give $1,000 because obviously they didn't have that type of wealth. So that's at least a good example.
I love this point. I think this is really a smart point. And I get that there are going to be some regional variations. Don't go up to New England. You got Davidson, Carleton, and Center, all above 50%. In fact, I think all of them are above 55% of alumni giving, right? And they all have high impact. Yes, some of them have great resources, but they all have high impact practices, and they're all also extremely focused on intellectual capabilities, right? And I think that this dovetails very well with my recommendation.
Sure, I think that's correct. And what I would say as a counterpoint perhaps is the RI at those schools is very different than what Brevard is doing. It's a very regional, not spreading out. I mean, the jobs these undergraduates go on to get are not going to be the same job that Davidson grads get.
Well, also, you don't really know what their experiences are like in the classroom. You did mention the faculty. They regarded the faculty as having a positive impact on them. But one concern I've got is that the size of the enrollment strikes me as though they've got a real economy of scale problem. You know, to maintain some kind of financial viability. Is that, I don't know, maybe Doyle would have a sense of where the break point is on what kind of enrollment you need to be financially viable. But I would think they're really kind of always tinkering on the
It's
brink
just-
of,
they're struggling.
on the edges all
It's
the
a
time.
survival mode.
Yeah.
Absolutely, absolutely, yeah.
Yeah, they refer to themselves as a minute liberal arts college as opposed to small.
Yeah, we're not small, we're minute.
Well, one of those buildings was real pretty. That's the only one they got.
Join me in thanking
Thank you. Break a leg. Is this out?
I mean, it's
Can you play the?
Okay, thank you. Okay, thank you.
Are you going? Oh, okay, I didn't know.
They were so worried about losing
I was worried
people.
about you. I was gonna say,
Oh, okay. Do you guys want a clicker? You want to get off the clicker? Okay, my yeah, because I
I thought there were slides. Extra support. Crazy slides.
I told you, there's always when it happened, I was like, I wouldn't bring it last time I did.
See, Candace McQueen has been very aggressive.
So you
No input, no input.
Yeah.
No input.
See that? That's not what I want to
And their classes are
So it's still here.